If you want to have no risk, then close the doors, get rid of your people, get rid of your vehicles, and that's not how the world operates. Risk management should be the office of no, K-N-O-W, and not the office of no. It's the risk manager's responsibility to help their colleagues get to the yes.
Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. I'm fascinated with people who are helping build and maintain the physical world around us. On each episode of this podcast, we'll dive in with a risk manager, speak to them about how technology plays a role in this process.
Welcome to Risk World. I'm Jason Reichl with Brick by Brick podcast. Today, we're going to be joined by Courtney C. Davis, Executive Vice President, Global Education Practice Leader at Hub. Always a mouthful. We'll give you guys a title.
It is a mouthful completely.
But what I'm really interested in is your background. You've done a lot of stuff. Let you talk about that. It doesn't need to be wrung out for me. But you started at the University of Chicago and then went to Hub. Let's just go into a little bit about your background, like 90 seconds on how did you end up in this seat right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the insurance and risk management industry now about 19 years, straight out of college. I was an intern first at a large brokerage in their higher ed practice, and I transitioned to another large brokerage in their education practice, being in production roles, also in placement roles. But then I was at the University of Chicago for 9 years over their insurance and risk management function for the entire enterprise, medical center, K-12 schools, and so on and so forth. But then I've joined Hub in the last 2 years. So half my career has been in brokerage world, half my career has been spent as a risk manager.
Let's start with just the education world in general first,
Yes.
Okay? How has it evolved in those last 19 years from when you were a broker to what you're seeing now, that universities and educational, all the way down, you were talking before the podcast, daycares, things like that. How's that landscape changed in 19 years?
Wow, it's changed significantly. And when I think about like the headwinds that institutions are facing with, it's like a force multiplier. Everything's happening more rapidly and in the face and presence of everyone due to social media and whatnot. I think that people are naturally drawn to the educational institutions because it's their alma mater. It's very relatable. But they're just such pressure in tight environments in terms of what they're being dealt with. The value of education. Is it worth it? You know, students trying to figure out their entrepreneurial routes.
Setting up programs when budgeting is not clear cut.
The pedagogy continuously changing as the world evolves. It's no longer just one institution in one city. It's a globalization of it overall.
I'm really excited to be talking about this. The other thing I want to talk about is your opinion on viewing risk management as a strategic lever within organizations, especially within the education field. How has that evolved, and how is it not just a control function anymore? How should risk managers be thinking about themselves differently than maybe they have in the past?
Absolutely. So I'll share with you my 2 risk management philosophies. I speak on them all the time. The first is that everyone's a risk manager. Even though in my old role, I had risk management in my title, there was people making decisions to do something or not do something every day. That's managing risk. The other is that risk management should be the office of no, K-N-O-W, and not the office of no. It's the risk manager's responsibility to help their colleagues get to the yes. And so in order to do that, you need information, whether that was to achieve the educational mission, maybe it's a research mission, maybe it's a medical mission. That is supporting decisions in itself and not just an operational function. It's an enablement function.
I love that, because one of the things that I often tell risk managers is educating your entire organization and getting them to make better decisions is how you define what a risk appetite is, right? Without risk, there is no work. So it's not to mitigate risk. It's to understand the risk better and then make sure that other people are making actions based on that. What does risk management deliver the most strategic value today? Where does it in the landscape of education? Where are you helping risk managers be more educated and really drive enterprise visibility?
Yeah, I think it's really thinking about it as a decision support tool and resources and educating people on the foundational framework of what they're utilizing. I think that that's key. It's not anything about just insurance. It's not just about procuring that. It's not just about stopping claims. It's about helping people change their mindset and their culture so that you're enabling them to do the same thing that you're doing day in and day out.
Are you seeing headcount grow within risk at organizations? Are you seeing new roles being defined? How's the job market for risk managers looking?
Absolutely. Well, I think the beauty of it is the job market is growing, but also the educational ecosystem that brings in new talent is growing. I'm here at RIMS and it's beautiful to see how many students are here.
Right.
I didn't grow up and say, I want to be a risk manager. I want to be an insurance professional. And so to see that landscape change and evolve and grow and people have a interest and see it as a career path, I think that that's one really important. The other is to see the interrelations between risk management and other functions, which allow them to grow within an organization. So I think really sophisticated institutions or resource-rich institutions do have a risk manager and hopefully has other support around it because there's so much that has to be done with just one person. And it's tough to be able to do that alone without other functions.
This is more of maybe, please help, talk help kind of thing. So we talk to a lot of people in construction. We talk to a lot of people in education, municipalities, all those kind of things. And it's a mixture of young, fresh, or let's call it innovation ideas around how these things work, mixed with legacy debt from how things used to work. How do you navigate that and bring teams together in order to achieve that goal that you just said?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I think it's about taking the data, taking the information and being innovative, to be forward thinking, to think about the black swan events, the things that you think weren't impossible, about how those can happen, learning from others, being stewards and continuously educating yourself is the best way of what you can prepare for and plan for at your institution.
Yeah, a risk manager should have a door open policy, right, to everyone.
Completely.
How do you measure success? Fewer incidents, faster recovery, better decisions. It sounds like the decision or stakeholder confidence. What's an area that you really hone into when you're looking at organizations and how they manage risk? What's the first momentum indicator that risk is going in the right direction for you?
I think the confidence piece is key, but the way you see it is about how proactive the outreach is to risk management. When risk management is always having to be the one to reach out, to ask, to inquire versus those phones ringing, the emails coming.
Yeah, right.
That's how you know it. Because you're not being seen as someone who says no. You're not being seen as someone who stops something from happening.
They're pulling you in because you make the entire environment more secure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not an afterthought. It's the forethought. Like, we need to bring the risk manager, we need to bring Courtney into this conversation to help us think about this, to help us solve problems, and also to make sure we're protected in the things that we ultimately want to do.
How do you then, when you find the risk and you don't want to say no, how do you make sure that gets all the way through the organization in a non-destructive manner so that everybody can actually understand the risk that this thing poses?
I mean, you're writing plays. You're like a quarterback trying to bring other people into the huddle to have a conversation so you can have all the viewpoints and perspectives. I mean, ultimately, a lot of risk managers don't even have the authority to make a decision to say yes or no, but we're going to make sure you have the information, that we're thinking about it in a way or a function that allows you to make the best decision. And sometimes people get there themselves once you start to have those conversations. And so you can say you're a quarterback because you're passing the ball to other people, but you're also bringing other folks in to make sure you got that lineup.
With the metaphor right now, right?
Exactly.
I don't know anything about football. It's going right over my head, but
I'm going to pass you the ball.
I'll catch the ball.
And you catch the ball. Exactly. You're going to huddle in and come together and have a conversation. And so much can be accomplished by doing that and thinking, the diversity of thought and perspective is what's necessary, and having the right stakeholders as part of those conversations.
One track I'm really passionate about is trying to get risk managers to understand how to sell the risk within their organization, right? As an opportunity, not as a weight.
It doesn't always have to be a negative. Risk itself seems like a negative thing, but you can optimize risk for something to be positive. Look, if you want to have no risk, then close the doors, get rid of your people, get rid of your vehicle, get rid of the bill. And that's not how the world operates.
Yeah, right. One thing that's happening in the private sector, the commercial sector, is a lot of organizations, in order to grow, because, construction is down in an area, so they'll go acquire another company in a different environment that they don't even understand, exposing themselves to a lot of risk. What's the equivalent of that in education right now? Is it buying campuses in other cities and doing expansion that way and going into different environments that you don't know? How is that risk showing up?
It can look like a couple of different things. It could be new campuses, new location, whether it's domestic or international. It can be a new degree program or field of study. Like, we're talking AI, digitalizations. We weren't having those same conversations 10s and 20s of years ago, because you have to figure out how to optimize it for your educational institution from an operational perspective. But then again, pedagogically,
because they're building it within the educational system too.
Exactly. And then that's your partnerships and your research. So those are just a couple of different examples of that.
What I want to understand is, what are some innovative patterns that you are finding that you are recommending to, risk managers within your sector that are emerging that are really helpful? Is it technology based? Is it new processes? What sort of support and new ways of thinking need to be evolved?
Oh, that's a really good question. That's a tough one. We haven't talked much about insurance. And this is so odd that I'm saying this as an insurance broker, but finding new ways to approach the insurance process, I think, is important, and really questioning or pushing your organization to look at what that risk appetite looks like. So you're not dealing with the ebbs and flows of the marketplace as much. But in turn, when you're doing that from an insurance decision point, it allows you to have conversations about, well, what risks do we need to mitigate for that to be a step that we can take? What claims or trends are we seeing that we need to address? So it's kind of starting with an end goal, but kind of figuring out how it aligns with those risk management processes that allows you to use those as kind of part of your decision making.
Does that mean as a broker, the most successful companies are bringing you new information when they're buying insurance, or when they're when they're working against the increases that the carriers are giving them? Is that like showing new evidence of better risk programs? Is that showing tighter vendor alignment? Is it demonstrating with evidence those realities?
It's all of the above, because what you want to do is being seen as one single institution that can't say, I'm like this other A, B, C, or D, this other educational institute, this other corporation. You want your risk to stand out alone. And the best way to do that is actually through storytelling, right? I'm more than the application, the PDF, or the document that you're looking at and you're reviewing for my organization. So let me tell you about how we are mitigating and managing risk. Let me tell you about how our board is engaged in this process all the way through all levels of the organization, and how this claim that you may think is negative, what we've been doing after the fact to really mitigate and make sure that if it happens again, it's not to the same extent, or it doesn't happen again at all. And so that
basically
becomes
you have
all
a
the
first
stories.
response where stuff happens that maybe you didn't know, but then how do you deal with it going forward and institutionalize that?
It all becomes part of the narrative, because there's things that they're naturally concerned about for any institution. It's abuse, it's traumatic brain injury, maybe it's AI, maybe it's deferred maintenance. But how and what are you doing to differentiate, to make that something that makes it attractive potentially to an underwriter?
So do you think now is more important than ever for risk managers to run like a risk log, like document? Like, are there tools that are being put in place that you find interesting that risk managers need to be thinking about? Like, most people don't have their risk appetite defined in any real way that they can show. They understand that concept. Most people don't understand actually having an incident log for everything that's coming in, right? It's only the incidents that might become claims that actually get into their incident log. And
documentation, details, anything that helps add color or lens that someone can look at is always helpful, especially if there's a frequency or severity issue that you're trying to attract or address. I think that that's helpful. Also, bringing your peers who you're working with as partners, bring them into the conversation. So they're here directly from safety. Maybe they're hearing directly from legal. They're hearing directly from the other people, so they can see how you work in action together, and they become part of that story as well.
I mean, Hub's a great company, and your customers have you as a expert. Brick by Brick is listened to from everyone in the value chain. How, if you're just buying commercial insurance in the most menial way because you run a in-home daycare, how is that a home daycare person supposed to be thinking about risk? What should they be protecting themselves with? What's like the minimum MVP for a small business that doesn't have all of your expertise behind them, and like someone like Hub?
Well, one is to not look at it as a one-time-a-year process that you're just trying to check the box to get done, right? It's everything you're doing throughout the year that becomes part of that conversation. And it shouldn't just be with, again, that person who's handling the insurance or risk management. It becomes part of the training. It becomes part of the education for all the stakeholders involved, so that your parents are seeing the signs of what you're doing to change and protect, their children who are coming to the facility, those who are working to support your staff who are working there. They see it too. It should be part of the overall culture itself, because every single person has some type of role in what ultimately comes, your insurance, quotes and everything. Everyone plays some type of role in that.
So we already kind of asked in this a little bit, but I like the storytelling element. So I want to ask if you have any further on this. How do you build trust between leadership, operations, and risk teams? Is it collaborative meetings? Is it memos? What is it a governance cadence that you recommend? Like, how should people be thinking about bringing those three entities together, operations, leadership, and risk? How should they be thinking about that on an ongoing basis, like in a program way?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways. I think there's the board level engagement. So hearing from the insurance or risk management function 2, maybe 3 times a year, but certainly in advance of a renewal, what's happening in the marketplace? What are other institutions like us dealing with? What should we anticipate the outcome? And then you share what that outcome is. Through all those messages, talk about the top risks, the drivers, and it starts to have conversations at that board level. But then that has to be backed up by the conversations you're having with the leaders. So you understand what the priorities are for the organization and where you're going and how you play in the in-between, and risk management can be part of the conversation. So this is, in essence, a description of ERM without being too formal in the approach or process. Even just taking those steps allows the conversations to happen at all levels of the organization.
So you advocate for the risk manager to be in the room with the board members, having that conversation, owning that directly to them, and not going up through some other leader who's representing them and trying probably their best. I'm not saying they're not, but it's good for the risk manager to speak for themselves.
I do believe that, especially because it allows for a dialogue of questions to happen back and forth that don't have to happen through a memo being written.
Yeah.
Because it's important, because they too see headlines and hear of other things happening at other organizations. And you can say, yes, this is a concern. No, this isn't a concern because we're doing X, Y, Z. Yes, we're hearing this from our peers, or we're hearing this from the market, and here's how we're tackling it as an institution. So hearing what's on their mind concerns also helps you to prioritize what you're pursuing going forward.
If you're a risk manager and you're interviewing for a job today, what are some of the signals or questions you should be asking to understand how that organization really thinks about risk, to make sure you're getting into an environment where you're going to be able to do your best work?
I think, what are the committees and structures that you have that are focusing on risk? Would I be involved in discussions with senior leaders or have FaceTime in front of them? Are these conversations happening at the board level? Is this purely just a discussion or conversation about my role being in insurance procurement, or are there other ways to change and shape behaviors at our institutions that affect the work that I'm doing?
I love that. It's sometimes hard when you're talking to a risk manager to understand if they're really insurance procurement or they're part of the operational foundation. And I find the companies that grow faster, that are more successful, risk is part of the operational framework of that entire organization.
Absolutely.
You can see it in their data.
And then it's also, is it just seen as a financial line item expense, or is it part of something where we're really able to affect change? Because that can be another side of it. Who is the role reporting into? What department is it reporting into? I do think a lot of times it's great when it's in the finance function, because it's a significant spin, which will likely make that it's going up somewhere through the audit committee or risk committee. And so I think that that's supportive. I've seen other institutions who look at it from a legal perspective, but you're not only mitigating and managing claims. There's a lot of gray areas that risk manager operates, not as black and white, what you may see there. And it's not just purely a safety function either. And so oftentimes that core administrative, as high as you can get, is where the function could sit. In the best case, a chief risk officer is part of the, senior leadership as well.
I love that. What are some of the trends that you're talking to your customers about, particularly in the education vertical? What are some of the trends? What's Hub working on? Maybe this is the time to sort of clue in on what's going on there.
Absolutely. I'd be remiss if I didn't start with abuse and molestation, because it's just impacting the industry as a whole so significantly. And it's not just about new events or matters. It's because we're still paying for claims from events that happened years ago. Fortunately, a lot of the states have requirements about the training and the things you should be doing. That doesn't mean getting the coverage is easy right now. And so that's still part of the message and story that we're dealing with.
The industry needs to make that insurance buying easier to get for these industries.
It's tough because people don't want to write it these days. So it's something that we're constantly dealing with as capacity reduces, as coverage reduces, as we're going more claims made, and truly trying to build separate towers almost in order to achieve those same type of limits and coverage as we once were.
So it's about the mix is changing dramatically.
Absolutely. And then the other side of it is AI. It's here. It's not going anywhere. So how do we optimize it? What is it being done from an operational perspective? How can you enhance the things that you're doing? Do you have policies that you're adapting? Is it tied in? Because I think that's a new conversation around the whole cyber lens and landscape that is impacting all industries as a whole. I mentioned this other one earlier, deferred maintenance. A lot of educational institutions have old facilities, and it's not always fun for donors to give you money to fix a hall versus build the new hall. Or when they give you money to build the new hall, they're not always giving you money to keep it up to date. And so that aging infrastructure is certainly a challenge too. And then the last one I would say is, active shooter, active assailant. Unfortunately, there's too many events that continue to happen, whether it's healthcare, education, religious institution overall. It's something that many still have to brace for, because sometimes it's not a matter of, if, it's kind of when something could happen. And so how are you prepared to respond for any type of crisis?
That's heavy.
All of them were kind of sad, and I'm sorry to do that, but these are realities that educational institutions are doing.
A cup of coffee, you're doing them. I understand.
Absolutely.
All right. We like to play a game called Risky or Too Risky.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you some questions. Usually right down the middle, I can tell with someone who's a broker or a risk manager how they answer these. I know, so I'm interested. Treating risk appetite as a document instead of a decision tool.
It is not your auto ID card that you pull out to show the police officer when you get pulled over. It actually needs to be a function that you look at and refer to. So that is risky.
Okay, great. I don't know how you're going to answer these now that we've had this conversation, but let's ask it for the audience. These do good on LinkedIn. Relying solely on insurance instead of operational controls.
You can't rely on insurance. So
Too risky.
It's too risky. There's a lot of words in those policies. So you need to know what you're going to do to ensure that you have coverage and response. Because if you're not following that policy, then the coverage is not there to begin with.
Major initiatives to proceed without scenario running.
Are you a big fan of scenario running?
I am, because I think a lot of people aren't prepared for when the event comes. And it's not just because it's an unknown event. It's because you don't know how to work together during those circumstances. And it's high pressure. You have to make decisions rapidly. And so everything comes down to communication. If you have a playbook, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble for not following the playbook that you have written.
Keeping legacy vendors because switching feels disruptive.
Disruption is how we move things forward. Disrupt away.
Okay, great. All right. Courtney, what's the biggest lesson you've learned about helping organizations say yes safely, strategically, and with confidence? What's the biggest lesson? What's the piece of advice you would give that sums up the last 19 years?
No one regrets over communication. No one regrets not having all the right players in the room. So thinking about who needs to be there, how you're communicating is usually going to solve 90% of your problems just by having the right people in the room to have a say. I think that's instrumental.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to trustlayer.io. And then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.